All right, folks, welcome to On This Hill. We are back in the podcast studio, and we are just past a week after Easter and had our next Sunday. And for us, that next Sunday was a mission Sunday. So we had a guest speaker, one of our missionaries that we support, come and speak. We're gonna leave her anonymous because the work that she does is in a Muslim context, and for security reasons, we have to keep her and the people that she work with safe. So we won't mention a lot about what she's doing here, but we do want to talk about missions a little bit. We kind of strategically, purposefully put missions right after Easter because I knew you would get a fair amount of people that kind of come back and check you out.
Yeah,
that month after Easter, and I want them to know what we're about, and we're about missions.
yeah, we're about sharing the message, and it's as pertinent, I think, today as it ever has been.
Yeah.
Especially in light of all the world events and turmoil and so forth, and people carrying the gospel message to different parts of the earth where maybe it's not as common.
Yeah, and both of us have some missions background. I think you more than me, but we both have spent our time in as ministers doing missions work. And want to talk a little bit about that because I think there's a lot of questions around missions, why it happens, why it exists. Why does missions exist? Why is it something that we do? Why do we spend money on it? Why do we send our kids off as missionaries? Why does the entire high school go on a missions trip every year?
What's the benefit or the return on investment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. What kind of thoughts do you have on that?
Well, I think, having been in missions, like you said, ourselves, our family, and so forth, and spent more than a decade outside of our country. So I'll just speak strictly from a personal standpoint. I think it was one of the best times of our lives, and I think it was fundamental in the formation of our kids and their worldview. And I think, worldview is important. Everybody has a view of the world, and it's not always correct. In other words, what we think of the world or what we think the world should be like or what the world owes us or doesn't owe us. And so I think when you get into another country, like we do with our high school kids last week or a couple of weeks ago, they see poverty and they see circumstances that are very, very different than their own. And almost all the time they're disadvantageous. They're not as they're not going to places as nice as where they live or in the neighborhoods where they live. And so it gives you some perspective as a missionary. You're the prime recipient, you come away, grateful. You come away enlightened. You come away with new friends and new understanding of cultures. You come away with a bigger view of the world. There's just 100 pluses. For the few negative things of, hey, there was a lot of bugs or I didn't like the food, there's a whole bunch of positive things.
Yeah. What about the person that says, well, that's just not enough pluses for me. I'm not interested. I don't want to go. Why? I mean, besides the benefit of me, and there is a big benefit. We don't deny it. There's a huge benefit. When you go on a missions trip, you do benefit from that trip. But what if someone says, no, thanks, I'm just not interested?
Yeah, I think that's again, on one hand, that person stands to lose because, frankly, their world is just going to remain small. Because we live in a big world. I don't know, right now the United Nations says there's about 190 or plus nations and countries. And so in those countries are real people, just like you and I, and they're made in God's image. So when I just say I don't need to know any of those people or I don't need to know any of that stuff, I just think my world stays small. So that's one side. The other side of the coin is I think there's a God who created the whole world and he created us in his image that loves those people. And those nations typically are struggling. Those nations are in poverty, or those nations are in either spiritual poverty or emotional poverty or literal physical poverty. And I think the gospel changes that across the board. It changes it at an individual level. It has the power to change it at a community level, and I think even at a national level. And you can see examples of that all over the world over the last 100 years, where the gospel came in and began to impact and influence an entire culture.
So the basis,
and they're better for it.
The basis of missions isn't my need to break out of my shell, but the basis of missions is God's desire to love people.
Yeah.
And if we call him Lord, then lordship means surrender. It means sacrifice. It means obedience. And it means, in this case, as a Christian, lordship means we participate in the global mission of our Lord.
Yeah.
He has a mission.
Yeah.
It's God's mission that none should perish. It's God's mission that all would have opportunity to hear the good news of Jesus Christ. But he leaves that in the hands of the church, which is a wild move
Wild
to
idea.
make. Yeah.
We represent him on the earth. It's an age-old question. All the way back in the book of Genesis, when the first two brothers killed each other, when Cain killed Abel over jealousy. And God asks him this question. He says, where's your brother? And he says, am I my brother's keeper? So he kind of a smart aleck response. Am I my brother's keeper? And God was like, actually, yeah, you are.
Yeah.
And I think that's a question that the church should ask and the church should answer. Are we our brother's keeper? Should we care about the brokenness that's in our world? If we had the power, if we had something that we could do to make it better, that we could do to bring some kind of better living, eternal life in the on the ground in real time, why wouldn't we do that?
Let's make some people mad and talk about the Pope and Trump.
Yeah.
Pope and Trump are in a fight right now.
Yeah. The paper today said the two most powerful American men in the world. That's how they described it.
Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting.
Yeah.
On a number of fronts.
Because the Pope had spoke some. I didn't get to listen. I'm speaking a little bit just out of headlines here. I apologize, but I still think it's worth mentioning. He'd called for peace in the Middle East, peace in Iran, and to set aside war. And he talked about selfishness and of course Trump as the one who's instigating that war, or maybe you could argue that he's not instigating the war. That Iran instigated the war by trying to move towards nuclear weapons or something. But either way, he's participating in the war, and now they're going back and forth at each other.
Yeah, and I think that's again, we could talk about it a lot and create all kinds of controversy. But I think that's a political stage, and that stage has always been there. And there's always different actors on that stage, and there's different drama being played out.
Yeah.
And it changed the stage changes so quickly. It'll be Mexico one week and the Middle East the next week, and then something in another nation the next week. But behind all that stage is God's hand at work in a universe and in a world. And God doesn't let them do their thing. He doesn't ignore that. But I just think there's a much bigger picture playing out on a regular basis.
Because at the same time that wars broke out between these two nations, one under the law of Islam, and one still calling itself a Christian nation. Yeah. Although within that nation is an awful lot of
mess
argument about what that even means. But right now, statistics seem to say, and the behind the scenes missionaries seem to say, that Iran might be the most growing church in the world right now.
Fastest growing church currently in the world.
Yeah, that they're currently, more people are coming to Christ in Iran than possibly in any other country. There are other closed countries that are hard to get. Iran's kind of a black box. Like, we see what goes in, but there's not a lot of knowing what what
like North Korea or something.
Yeah. So exactly like North Korea. Yeah. So, just imagine that while politics plays itself out and will, and neither one of us claim to be politicians or wise enough to make political decisions, our call is to evangelize. The mission's call is to evangelize. Yeah. And so while my taxpayer money is going to pay for bombs, it is. You just know.
That's true.
Part of my tax money is going to go towards a military establishment. But I want my tithes. Yeah. I want my offerings to go to maybe evangelize those same people that the bombs might be dropping on. Right. To say that you are also made in the image of God. Yeah. And worthy of hearing the gospel and having an opportunity to, and you could be a brother. Yeah.
I just think it's fascinating if you look at it, just say from a, I don't know if the word is secular or whatever point of view there, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, none of those countries have an immigration problem. There's not people risking their lives on small boats to go to those countries.
To get in. To get out, yes.
There's people that will risk their lives to get out. So the honest question should be why? And of course, the answer, I think, in part at least, is they're living under oppressive regimes.
Oh, yeah.
They're living under selfish leadership. They're living under
Yeah.
corrupt leadership. And so the passage of scripture that says, when the wicked rule, it says in Proverbs, the people mourn. And so that should hurt us. We should feel that,
Yeah,
because
we should
I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And I just think so. Politics plays its role on that stage, but I think the gospel plays its role. We had a missionary recently, someone who told us that 7 out of 10 Iranians are respond to the gospel message when they hear it.
When given the gospel message,
when they hear it
7
clearly.
out of 10 of them will respond positively. Like either I want to know more or I want Jesus to
I
be
wonder
my
if we could say
Savior.
that about Portland.
You can't. There's no way. Yeah.
Yeah.
But why?
Or America in general, unless you were in the Deep South.
Why
or the Bible Belt.
are they so hungry for that message?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think part of the answer is that when you live in a place of prosperity, relative prosperity and relative freedom and peace, like the United States, there's a sense of, I got pretty much everything I need, and maybe I'll investigate the claims of the gospel. Maybe you can talk to me about my need for God.
But also, I've curated my life enough to be relatively comfortable. And if that message calls for themes like I just said, surrender and sacrifice and obedience and some participation in a global mission, I don't think I'm that interested in it. I'm relatively comfortable here. But if your life is already incredibly uncomfortable because of poverty or because of a military regime or because of a religion that dictates every part of your life, and then you are suddenly like, oh, Jesus sets me free?
Yeah, freedom?
Yeah, I want freedom.
Because there is no freedom. Yeah. And I think we underestimate, that, the power of circumstances to, we talked last night, we had a missions class, and we talked about the change of the soils, and Jesus told the parable. He said, a man went out to sow seed on the ground, and some seed fell on hard ground, and it bore no fruit. Some seed fell on rocky ground. It withered. Some seed fell on the weeds. The weeds choked it out, and some seed fell on good ground. But it's really the parable of the soils. It's the parable of the ground. The seed is the same in every instance.
Yeah, the seed's the gospel. It remains the same.
And so when you look at Iran, or when you look at Cuba, you see that the ground is broken. The ground is open, or you see it sometimes on a short-term basis. There's an earthquake or there's a natural disaster, and all of a sudden, everybody's hearts are open to help, to counsel, to comfort, and all those kinds of things. And I think that's a natural human response.
And I think there's, wrapped up in what we're talking about, there is a particular worldview of ours, a biblical worldview, that says we genuinely believe that Jesus is the way, exclusive, that there is one way to the Father, and that is through the Son. That's it. And if we didn't believe that, then it would be a lot easier to just say, well, they've got their faith and we have ours.
Yeah, just send some rice.
Yeah, send some resources.
Yeah.
But we don't need to send our children. We don't need to go ourselves.
Yeah.
We can relax because, one way is as good as another. But here on Sunday at the Kaiser campus, I asked the question, how many of you believe that Jesus is exclusively the way? And it looked like every hand went up. There might have been a few hands that didn't go up because they were still, trying to figure it out. And then I said, okay, now imagine if you really believe that, what should you think about the people around the world right now who are living and dying without that message of the gospel? And that we don't like to. It's interesting.
Pinned down like that.
Yeah, we don't like to get pinned. And I know it could almost be manipulative. I hope I'm not trying to be manipulative, but I'm trying to make us think through the logical conclusion
of it, right? Yeah.
Because the unbeliever is happy to say to you, well, what about the heathen on the other side? Like, they love to ask the Christian, you really believe that some kid in some, far off place in Africa who never heard the gospel and dies in there, like, you don't like, he's outside. Like, what do you, and we don't like to think about that, but we have to. Right. We have to think about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a guy just last night after our class. He came up and because we had talked about this very thing about sharing the good news of the gospel, and it's good news because it's good news. It answers the questions of our lives. It answers the big questions of, what do I do with my guilt? What do I do with shame? What do I do with my failures? The Bible calls all those things related to sin.
Yeah.
S-I-N, sin. And so we can pretend it's not there. We can cover it up with religious works. We can try to ignore it, but we can't get our minds off of it, man. But anyway, this young guy said, he works in like the restaurant industry. And he said, most people that I work with, they don't want to hear about this. They're good the way they are. They're fine. And he said, so I'm not sure, what do I do as because I believe it. I believe it's the message. It's a life-giving message. I believe it's a life-changing message, but no one wants to hear it. So what do I do?
Yeah.
What do I do with it?
Yeah, it's interesting in the parable of the sower. It feels like the sower isn't very discriminatory about where the seed goes. He just throws it down, and some of it throws on good soil, and some of it doesn't. So, and he doesn't come back and worry over the rocky soil or worry over the thorn. He just throws it.
Yeah,
and then if it doesn't take, it doesn't take. But his responsibility is to give it away. And I'd say that to him is like, that's okay. You don't have to take responsibility for whether or not they receive it. You just got to speak Jesus. When opportunity arises, speak Jesus, or make an opportunity to speak Jesus. And then when you do, like, for him, and I don't know who this is, if he's ever had a chance to do this, but when you get to a place where there is good soil, it'll blow your mind. Yeah. And we've got to see that at times in our lives. We've been in places where it's like, you can't help but lead people to the Lord. You're just sharing the simplest gospel, and people are rushing to receive.
Yeah, well, our speaker last night talked about that very thing. They call it. There's a term they use called broad sowing, where you just share the gospel and let the gospel do its work. But my response to this young man last night was kind of along these lines. Listen, first of all, you don't know what's going on inside of a human heart. Everybody likes to say they're fine because that's an American response,
right?
But and they, in fact, may be fine for the moment, but sooner or later, everybody on the planet at some time is going to have to deal with their mortality. Everybody's going to have to deal with end-of-life issues, and everybody's going to have to deal with, what do I do with this weight I carry? And if there is a God, how do I know him, and how can I be right with him? And that's just, and that almost sounds like a fearful thing, and it doesn't have to be that alone. But what about a God who's incredibly generous, who's what drives him is to see his creation redeemed, to see us have life and life more abundantly. That's what Jesus said.
Yes.
I've come that you would have life and life abundantly. But we don't see it that way.
No,
in our selfish state.
I 100% agree. He has come to give us life and life more abundantly. But then he goes and talks about it like saying, deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me. But what you experience when you do those things is like, oh, this is
a whole
life
different
abundant.
form of life.
Like, I would have never
I thought it was a new car and the best job and a bigger house.
Right, because we value comfort and safety and success.
Yeah.
And if comfort, safety, and success are your values, then the cross is out the window, denying yourself is out the window.
Sure, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, global missions is out the window. But what you actually experience when you do deny yourself, when you do pick up the cross, when you accept that vocabulary and start to live your life that way, you realize like, oh, this is life.
Yeah.
This is what I was made for. The number of times we've taken young people on a missions trip and some kind of conversation happens like that with them where they're like, this is what I was made for. This is amazing. It's like something new comes alive inside of them. Like, man, I because when you turn inward, we had a kid share a testimony on our last worship night, and he was talking about just being addicted to video games.
Yeah.
Like, and his whole day was just about him, and it was just about this pleasure that he was seeking. And when he finally set that aside, and then he looks up, there's like, oh, there's a world out here. There's life out here. There's so much more. And I think that's what happens when you really jump into lordship with Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, it opens a door, opens a world that you didn't even know existed. And I think everybody who's a follower of Jesus, if it's authentic, you've experienced something that has shifted your values. Mm-hmm. There was a ministry, this is a little rabbit trail, but there was a ministry back in the, I would say late 70s, 80s, mostly the 80s. And it was called Full Gospel Businessmen. And a guy, I don't remember who started it, but it was a businessman who had a very successful run of life.
Yeah.
But he was empty. And so different guys have written on this. But he started, and he had an encounter with Jesus Christ. And his entire value system got turned upside down. He stopped chasing the next deal or the next level of wealth or whatever. And then he started sharing this gospel message with his peers, with his colleagues, and it began to spread. And then pretty soon they're kind of, the way they operated was they would have these breakfasts and they would gather a bunch of businessmen. And of course, businessmen love to network, and so they would come, and then a man would stand up and just share how Jesus Christ had changed his life, a successful man just like them. And so all of a sudden, their value system was challenged.
Yeah.
Like, well, maybe you're not as rich as you think you are.
Yeah.
Maybe you're not as well off as you think or imagine you are. And so this I call it the parallel kingdom, that's right next to us. But you have to go in through the door to even understand it or experience it. And they were introduced to that through this Full Gospel Businessman.
Yeah, there's something about that. Excuse me. Jesus saying it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than a rich man in the kingdom. There's just something about that riches and wealth and success. It's not impossible, but it's just
that's not what he was saying.
No, it's just blinders in a way.
Right.
It keeps you from feeling
in the
need.
natural.
Yeah,
you're not going to see it.
Because there's nothing immoral about money. It can be immoral, but it's not in and of itself immoral.
Right.
But there's something about it that just can be a
or it gets a hold on you.
The American dream versus the kingdom dream, they're not the same.
No,
they're not the same.
Not at all.
No,
not even close.
Yeah, and so often you see preachers preaching what really feels like the American dream to listeners who don't obey, and to people who know but don't go. And that like I wonder sometimes. There are things sometimes called the Good Samaritan laws. Have you ever heard of the Good Samaritan laws?
Yeah.
Good Samaritan law is if you see someone in distress and you do nothing about it,
you can
actually
liable.
be liable. Yeah, and some of those, like famously or especially like out in remote places, like in the ocean, if you hear a distress signal, you have to answer that signal,
right?
Because they know like nobody else might hear it. You have to go follow that SOS and take care of them. And I wonder about the Good Samaritan laws in heaven, like what happens in eternity, like what kind of judgment, will land on the church.
Yeah.
Those who like, well, I listened, I was a listening Christian, not an obeying Christian, or I knew, but I was a knower, but not a goer.
Yeah. And, while you were talking, I was reflecting on this move among businessmen, Christian businessmen, in that decade of the 80s. And one of the voices in that movement was a man named Patrick Morley, and he wrote several books called Man in the Mirror and several others. But he was that guy. He was the guy that had made it, so to speak, in the secular world, but then he converted, and then he spent the rest of his life reaching out to his field. His field was business people. But there's this one of the best quotes ever. He said, "What if failure isn't to have attempted something and not succeeded? What if real failure is to succeed at something that ultimately doesn't matter?"
Yeah.
And so that's a total shift. That's 180 degrees. It turns everything upside down. And so then you have people that have actually taken that and gone with it, like Jim Elliot, who lost his life in the 50s with 3 or 4 other men in the jungles of Ecuador, trying to reach an unreached. So here these young men had left college and they had their whole life ahead of them, and they chose to go to the jungle to evangelize a group of Indians that most of the world had no idea existed. Yeah. And of course the story plays out that they lost their lives, and they were front page of Life magazine, I think, in 1958 or 59. But in his diary, his college diary was the words, "No man is a fool to give up what he cannot keep, to gain what he cannot lose." Both of those people had a worldview that had been turned upside down, if you will, by the gospel. Because when those men were killed, him and his colleagues on that riverbank, even the secular world said, "Oh, what a waste!
Yeah,
what a waste!"
Yeah.
But his wife, the widow, went on to be a minister herself, to return to that tribe, to see them come to know the love of Jesus and the greatness of God, and actually have churches, and literally it shifted that tribe from being a vicious, bloodthirsty tribe to a peaceful tribe.
Yep.
So it's like that's a full circle thing there.
Yeah, I once heard it was a Jewish conservative talk show host guy. It was a long time ago. I wish I could remember his name, but I can't remember it anymore. But for some reason, he got on the topic of Jim Elliot because it had made such an impression on him when it happened. He was an older guy. I think he's passed away now. And he said, he repeated the whole story on air. He just told the story from memory. And he said, if I was a Christian, I'd never stop talking about that. That's the best advertisement for Christianity I've ever heard.
The ultimate sacrifice.
Him still not a believer is like that. He said, that just blows me away that those young men would do that. Like that is the best advertisement for Christianity I've ever heard.
Yeah.
You know, on the other end, this is a fictional story, but you ever watch the movie There Will Be Blood?
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that an amazing movie?
The guy that's just got this
Oh
incredible,
my goodness. This drive.
insatiable craving for wealth.
Yeah, and he does it. He's
does it.
incredibly successful.
Yeah.
But then in the end...
And he dies a miserable, murderous...
Right.
Isn't it interesting that the religions... So Christianity, if you look at the end, again, it's easy to find what's wrong. It's easy to see where we failed. But in the end, what we're after is people experiencing abundant life, forgiveness of sin, freedom from guilt and fear, and a life that's worth living. Where if you look at, and so people are willing to sacrifice their futures, to sacrifice their resources, and even lose their lives. You think of Islam and some of the extreme parts of Islam. I'm not saying it's all like this, but there's so much anger and hatred and vengeance and revenge, and in the end, what do you have? You have just you don't have the abundant life. You have a very controlled, religious, law-filled life.
Yeah, I have no problem saying that Islam is one of the most abominable religions on the planet that is the most distorting of who God actually is. I truly believe it is a terrible giant.
Yeah, but Christianity, like Islam, like Christianity, I think, has some people who genuinely want to know, who am I? What am I here for? What does this God require of me? So they're sincere in their questions, but two totally different answers,
Completely different.
Totally different roads to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, so, okay, maybe we can talk about this, though, because we've said, lordship is really the reason, but also within that submission and lordship, there's this great reward that happens when we participate in advancing the kingdom around the world. But isn't it weird that the Great Commission is just like the last verse of the last thing that Jesus says before he goes to heaven? And it just says, all authority on heaven and earth is given to me. Go ye therefore into all the world. And then he pretty much ascends into heaven.
Yeah. Matthew 28 and Acts 1, both scenarios. Yeah.
So
we talked about that.
Do we hang
night.
all of this on that one verse, that one thing, or is there more to it than that?
That's a great question. We actually talked about this very thing last night. That
I'm setting you up.
No, that was good because we weren't there. We weren't together, but the words "Great Commission" are not found in the Bible. They're not in that. Those words are literally not there.
The word missions isn't found in the Bible.
Yeah, but the idea is everywhere. So if you've only read the Bible, hunt and peck. Like, I'm just going to open this book and start right here, or I'm just going to read Proverbs. I'm going to read the book of Psalms, and that's better than not reading, I guess.
Yes.
But when you read it in its entirety, what you see is this flow of God's story from Genesis to Revelation. From Genesis 11 all the way to Revelations 5, you see God dealing with people, broken people, sinful people, separated people. Genesis 1 through 11. The people are there. They've got a common language. They're building the Tower of Babel, and they're going to make a name for themselves. And God scatters them throughout the earth. And again, it's a crazy story. He confuses the languages, and that's why it's called Babel.
Yeah.
And people are separated. But what you find is redemption right away, because those people become nations.
Yeah.
Those people become groups of people. And then the rest of the Old Testament is just one prophecy after another of a God who's saying, I'm going to send a Redeemer. I'm going to bring all these people back together somehow, someday. And of course, he starts with a guy named Abram who wasn't Jewish. He was Abram, but he became the father of Israel.
They become their own nation of all those nations.
And lo and behold, God uses that nation to plant His presence in a burning bush, or in a tent in the wilderness, or in a temple. So people come from all over the world to say, "Hey, I want to see God."
Yeah.
Oh, right over there in that temple, just wait in line, kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
And then one day, John the Baptist says, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." So all of a sudden, God shows up in the flesh.
Yeah.
And of course, no one gets it at the time.
So He didn't suddenly decide at the end of the Bible to, well, let's go ahead and redeem all the peoples.
Yeah.
But He'd always intended to use Israel.
The culmination. Then it wasn't the end, and it wasn't the. It wasn't it was Churchill that said it wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the end of the beginning. And the end of the beginning was Jesus coming, dying for the sins of the world. That would be the reconciling agent of all these separated peoples.
Yeah.
And of course, in the book of Acts, book of Acts picks up with Jesus restating, "Hey, you're going to be my witnesses here in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the earth. So wait here."
Yeah.
And of course, what was the waiting about? The waiting was about
the indwelling of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, and we just thought it was for us Jews.
Right.
No, Peter, sorry.
Yeah, you're going to spill out of the upper room into at this time, a city crowded with the nations.
Yeah.
They were all there.
All there.
As God-fearers or other reasons. And out of that upper room is birthed the church that immediately starts preaching, to the nations.
Yeah. And God has to kind of do a little thing with his friend Peter and send him to a Gentile's house to have lunch.
Yeah.
And when Peter walks in the house, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but they're in Acts, and Peter realizes, oh my gosh, this gospel is for all peoples. And that's when you see, that's that Great Commission.
Yeah.
That's that redemptive story that's been going on for thousands of years. Those guys landed in that chapter, and we're living in this chapter 2,000 years later.
One of my all-time favorite articles, I think one of the best articles that's ever been written, is called "The Kingdom of God Strikes Back."
Yeah.
And it's Ralph D. Winter.
Ralph Winter.
Who was a missiologist and a very intelligent man. And he wrote it from the chapter 11 perspective on like how the kingdom of God, and when he says strikes back, he means after sin struck a blow in the human heart. There was this incredible fallout until it got so bad God had to judge the earth because the corruption was so terrible. It was just man hurting man. And then from chapter 11 on, he just does this redemptive work through Abraham and then Israel, and then it's a.
When you read that Ralph Winter, he was a professor, Fuller Theological Seminary. That's still out there. You can find that on the internet. Was it called
Ralph D. Winter, The Kingdom of God Strikes Back? Yeah.
If you're a believer listening to this and you haven't read that article, you need to go find that article because it gives you the picture of what I'm trying to describe. Like then when you read it, you're like, oh. I think a lot of people, this is my opinion, and I'm a pastor, so maybe I get to do this, but there's a lot of people that say they're followers of Jesus and they have no idea. They have very little idea of God's story, how the big story is connected all the way from Genesis to Revelation.
Right.
It's which is unfortunate.
It is.
Because then when you talk to them about missions or about sacrifice or anything, you're just met with kind of a blank stare like, well, what?
And I think most of us discover it first after simply reading the Bible straight through, or maybe you take some Bible course that kind of forces you to do it, and you see that scarlet thread of redemption. And I think most of us see it as, oh, that was God working to save me from the very beginning till now. And then there's another realization, like, oh, he wasn't just to save me.
Right.
It was his redemption of the world.
whole world.
Like he wants to save the entire world.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting, that fact? What you just described was the reason that the Jews couldn't recognize who Jesus was when he was standing right in front of them, because they didn't want the whole world saved.
Yeah.
They wanted their kingdom back. They wanted their Roman oppressors gone. They wanted to be at the top of the heap.
Yeah.
They didn't want the whole world saved.
Yeah.
They didn't care about the world.
And God is saying, I do want to save you. I just don't want to save only you.
Right, exactly.
I want to save more than you.
And they missed. Well, think about how that plays today. Like, if all I'm interested in is my own success or my own nation's wealth or my own nation's being on my own, nation's superiority, which plays pretty well today, then I could very well miss the Jesus that was in the Bible, I could miss him today if he was standing in front of me. I wouldn't recognize him. I would choose a counterfeit gospel. I would choose a health and wealth gospel. I'd choose an easy, comfortable, successful gospel.
Yep.
And it's just crazy how it correlates today.
I think it's worth saying here that I don't know. I'm just thinking about missions and strategy in missions in the church, and we try to we do our best at Church in the Hill because we see in the context of the Great Commission a commission to Jerusalem, Judea, the uttermost parts of the earth, and for them that would have meant home, surrounding area.
Yeah, the concentric
far
circles.
off. The far off. And so we try our best to have these three categories in our missions and support some people that work right here in the U.S., but they're doing evangelism. They're evangelizing people. They're sharing the gospel with people. But recognize that those people, they're surrounded by Christians. They're surrounded by churches. They're not unreached. They could hear the gospel if they want to, but they still haven't. They still haven't received it. So that could be FCA.
Fellowship of Christian Athletes. City ministries.
Exactly. But then also to those that are going outside of our culture. So they have to learn another language. They have to go somewhere. And that place has people that need to be saved. But they very often also already have churches established. Mexico, we go to Mexico every year as a church. We go to Mexico every year.
Yeah.
And it's so worth doing. But that's still not the unreached. They could be the unevangelized, but not the unreached. And then that last third, we try our best to try to support people that are going to places where no one has gone yet, or where very few have gone yet, or a church has not yet been established. And so that we're wanting to establish churches where they've never been established, so that church can then propagate itself. And then when it's healthy, then you don't have to continue. You can support it, but now you release it, and now it's in its own context. And they know best how to evangelize their culture.
Yeah, becomes a naturally reproducing
So a lot of
living
times
organism.
what you hear us talk about the most is that very first step of some kind of short-term outreach. And we, because we're big believers in that. But ultimately, we know as good as that is and as helpful as it can be, it's just the first step in reaching the really unreached people around the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and there is no... if that's all true, if it's not true, if the gospel is just a fairy tale, and the church is just a crutch, or God is a crutch for weak people, then that's about all you've got. That's it. That's all you've got. Some people are going to accept the crutch, and some people are not.
Yeah.
But what if it is the greatest story ever conceived? What if it's the greatest story ever told, and I could be living right next door to it, and I don't engage with it? Then I think that's the appeal that I would make, that right next door is the God of the universe, and he's wanting to be discovered because he's come to seek and to save the lost, and he's come that we would have abundant life. He's not mad at us. He's not mad at humanity. He's come to redeem humanity, but we've made a mess of our humanity. So we think that it would be more attractive, but people can be stubborn.
People can be stubborn. Yeah. But the good news is so amazing.
Yeah.
Like I said, there is this, it's a funny sell because it is life and life more abundant, but it'll take you places you don't want to go, to do things you don't want to do. Mm-hmm. But then in doing that, you grow.
Yeah. You're going to be something you never would have done on your own.
On Easter, it said something to the effect of the cost of your new life is your old life. If you want new life, the old life has to die. You can't have both. And not cost in a sense like you buy your rebirth in Jesus.
You're right.
No.
Yeah.
It just the reality is when you come into the kingdom, the old you is going to have to die. Mm-hmm. Stop trying to drag it around.
Sometimes that's painful.
It is.
But isn't that example play out in everybody's life all the time? Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is what I want to do. If I was raising children, what I'd want them to do as a parent, as a responsible, loving parent, is I want them to grow to be mature, healthy adults. Mm-hmm. I want them to be people of character. I want them to be people of perseverance, right?
Yeah.
So trips to Disneyland, as wonderful as they are, do not produce
No.
the growth of character.
No, they don't.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Allowing your child to eat all the ice cream he wants does not produce a healthy adult. What does change children? Well, what changes them is some measure of friction, whether that's hardship or discipline or something like that, where they have to dig in, so to speak, and hold on and persevere. And they're better because of it. So affliction or pain is part of our lives. And we know it in so many other realms. We know it in the bodybuilding realm. We know it in the health realm. We know it in the sports realm. We know that without pain, there's no gain.
No.
So the gospel says, hey, this isn't painless, but the end is glorious.
Yeah.
It's better than
it is glorious.
a beautiful body or a trophy. It's eternal.
I'm trying so hard not to preach this Sunday's message, because in this Sunday's message, we're in chapter 16 of John, and he's telling his disciples, you're going to be sorrowful for a little while, but then there's going to be joy.
Yeah.
And then he talks about childbirth as being like that. Like, there's just terrible pain. No one would choose that pain, but they do choose the baby.
Right.
They do choose life.
Yeah.
And there's something, you're diminished without that life. If you just decide, I'm just going to be singular. I'm never going to multiply. And I'm not obviously picking. I'm just saying, like, if you choose, like, just selfishness,
if you
then
choose
your life is
comfort,
small. But the mother who says, "Oh, I'm going to give my life for another," and the mothers do. Mothers give their life for another. They lose years off of their life to care for another person's life, and yet they love it. They bless it. A good mom does anyway.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of brings me back to that the other night when you talked about that young high school kid talking about all he did was sit in his basement and play video games.
Yeah.
I think you see that scenario played out thousands of times where, people are just being entertained to death. I mean, that was the book written a decade ago, Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Yep.
And I think I don't think we see that as dangerous. We don't see amusement as, hey, that's dangerous. No one would, because we'd be thought of as, gosh, what a grump or what a killjoy. But amusement, I enjoy a good movie. I enjoy a good meal. I enjoy hanging out I enjoy fun. But amusement can be dangerous.
Yeah, it can.
Because it can keep you from the real life.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way of saying it, amusing ourselves to death. Like, we're missing out on something much better by
Postman
being
was the author,
distracted by something else.
Yeah.
I just recommend, as we close here one more time, find that article, The Kingdom Strikes Back. I'll see if I can find and give it to Ethan to put
a link on our
our
page.
notes. Can I read the first little piece here? Because I think it'll whet your appetite for it. Because the first piece, he's actually a really good writer too. Like, he writes really well.
Yeah, he was a brilliant.
It's not just dry. But listen to this. It says, man has virtually erased his own story. Human beings, as far back as we have any paleological record, have been fighting each other so much they've destroyed well over 90% of their own handiwork. Their libraries, their literature, their cities, their works of art are mostly gone. Even the little that remains from the distant past is riddled with evidence of a strange and pervasive evil that has grotesquely distorted man's potential. This is strange because apparently no other species treats its own with such deadly hatred. The oldest skulls bear mute witness that they were bashed in and roasted to deliver their contents as food for other human beings. An incredible array of disease germs also cuts down population growth. Listen, I mean, that is...
something's going on there.
That's visceral. And he's describing evil.
Yeah.
He's describing evil, and that's why it's titled The Kingdom Strikes Back.
Yeah.
Because evil was destroying God's creation.
And evil is pervasive.
And it is pervasive. But Jesus has something to say about it, and Jesus wins, which is awesome. It seems like evil wins at the cross. Feels like this that I just described is what happened at the cross.
Yeah.
But actually, it was the great reversal.
Yeah.
It was Jesus winning.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, folks. Not often you tune into this podcast. I get to talk about skulls bearing mute witness of being bashed in and eaten by other people.
You heard it here first.
You heard it here first, yeah. Yeah. All right. Come and join us on Sunday. We're going to be back in the book of John, looking at chapter 16. Really excited about it because we're talking about joy and joy's inevitability, that joy cannot be robbed from you, that actually it is a basis within the kingdom of God, but also that it is not without suffering. And if you try to avoid suffering, you actually will also avoid joy. So,
Yeah, you might have questions about anything we talked about today. Or you might have comments. Let us know. Get a hold of us through our website, and
Absolutely.
we'd love to address them.
yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on Sunday. Bye.